All right, great. So thank you guys for showing up today. I appreciate it. My name is Mark Applet, and I'm a designer and front-end web developer for a local company here in Sacramento called SimSoft Solutions. We are a design and technical solutions agency, and we've worked with a lot of California governments, including Department of Technology and a whole host of other departments. And so here's my email address. If you feel like you want to reach out to me with any questions, feel free to. So we are going to be talking about less and how to theme the state template. Now the problem is that this is a really deep conversation. I'm going to try to give sort of like the high level ideas and concepts behind the technologies that were used in the state template. But we really want to see, because this is so short, we can't present everything. We want to maybe try to put together some sort of a workshop, maybe a half day, full day. And I have a Google form that I have linked up here. And then I will show this again at the end. So if you didn't catch this URL, and I think these slides will probably be put online at some point. But we want to check your guys' interest level. Just sign up with your name and email, I think, and then maybe just a couple of times and some levels of interest and whatnot. So feel free to check that out. So today we're going to talk about some of the technologies used in that version 4 and now version 5 template. We are going to do literally a crash course in sort of like the basic templating code. And we're going to create a really ugly theme, or I actually have already created a really ugly theme, but I'm going to show it to you and what I was able to create in a minimal amount of time. So back in 2014, I actually stood up here and with the Department of Technology, we announced the version 4 theme along with the CA Gov web publishing platform. And it was really exciting because although the theme itself didn't really change much, a lot of things changed under the hood. There was a lot of thought that went into the underlying code that went into it. So we couldn't really see much, but it set the stage for moving forward into the future. It took the time to improve accessibility, which is a hot topic for government agencies. It added 30 new features that webmasters like yourself have been asking for. You've asked, you told Department of Technology, hey, we need these kinds of features. And Department of Technology listened and they included a lot of those features. So you're probably familiar with the CA Gov template. This is version 4. And it had 5 different color themes. Here I'm showing the Paso Robles alongside Sierra. And what's really cool about this is that with some CSS and JavaScript changes, we're able to create this. This is a very different look and feel. If you've been to the CA Gov portal, you'll notice that it's a radically different look and feel. And when I told people about this, they're like, well, how much work was involved? And what was really interesting is that there wasn't a whole lot. Here, this is going to be really hard to see, but I want to kind of show you a couple of things here. So this is a diff, and I did a little screen recording. I normalized the information, and the things that are in red are the things that are changed. And most of the things that you see are things that were added to enhance the template. It's not a complete rewrite. So version 4 to version 5 is more or less the same. We did a little bit of a flip-flop here where we changed the header and then added some backwards compatibility call for JavaScript at this level. But you can see that the HTML isn't a complete rewrite. I don't know, you guys, you've probably been in part of these projects, and every version in the past of the state template was a complete rewrite. And this is really impressive. This is really refreshing. So that opens up the door to sort of like theming or color scheming your website using the state template to match your organization's brand. And this was all made possible by a couple of technologies. In this case, this technology stack uses Node.js, Grunt.js, Less, and Bootstrap. If you've been on the web, you're webmasters, you've probably heard these names before. Maybe you've even used some of them or even something similar. One of the reasons why these technologies were chosen is because they are open source. They're free. They're zero cost to you to install and use. They're very well tested, very large community support. All of these technologies are supported by a very large community who's active in, their continued support. So one of the things I want to talk about first is Node, because Node is this thing that you kind of have to use it. Node is, I was trying to think of the best way to explain Node. Basically what the developers of Node did is they took Google Chrome's JavaScript engines called their V8 engine, and they packaged it in a format that allowed you to install it onto your computer, and you were able to run web applications or run JavaScript from your computer. And what it did there is that it gave you the ability to access files. If you're webmasters, you've probably created JavaScript, you know that you have no native connection to the actual file system outside the browser. So what ends up happening is a lot of the technologies that are being written, things like Grunt and less, they are all written to use JavaScript, and Node becomes that foundation. Now, the CA-Gov template and even the CA-Gov web publishing or any of that stuff is not built on Node. They're not using Node as a web application, but they are using the underlying technology to actually run as like the engine for some of these other services like Grunt and less. So it really is the foundation. It is something that you have to install, but once you install it, that's it, you're done. You don't have to install it again. Depending upon your platform, Microsoft, Macintosh, and Linux installations, simple one-click installation, takes only a couple of minutes. You can download it from nodejs.org, and you can be up and running with sort of like the core technology that's used in the state template. So how is the state template using Node? Well, primarily, we're using it as a Node package manager. Now, Node package manager comes installed when you install Node.js. And if you're familiar with package managers and any other platform, be it .NET or Bower or something, you know that you can get dependencies or you can get files off the internet and you can download them and put them onto your own computer system. So for the most part, Node works as a package manager, and it actually allows those technologies like Grunt and less to actually operate. And one of the big reasons why we do it is we can concatenate files, we can compress and optimize files, and we can also leverage some real-time previewing of these changes. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in just a moment. So if you were to download the original source code for the state template, you'll see that there's a couple of files here. There's the Grunt file, and there's this package.json. And this package.json is sort of like the telltale sign that maybe there's some sort of application going on. And then Grunt is telling us, hey, that application might actually be Grunt. The package.json is primarily, at least in terms of the CA-Gov template, is just a manifest. It just says, it's just a list of some dependencies that are needed to be used with the state template. And those dependencies are things like Grunt and less, and we added a few other bits and bobs to improve things like live reloading and watching your file system. And then the Grunt file is sort of like the configuration for how this should all be put together and how it should all execute. And I'm going to go into that just a little bit more, but I just kind of want to touch on it for just a moment. So Node, once you have Node installed, I told you I don't know if I said you're done, but you're not quite done. You actually need to do one more thing, and that is when you first get the file, remember I talked about those dependencies, and that package.json contains those dependencies. So you actually open up your command line, your terminal, or your IDE if your IDE supports it, and you just change directory into wherever you have that CA-Gov template. and you run one command, and it says npm install. Now, which npm is Node Package Manager. And Node Package Manager goes out to the internet, and it downloads Grunt for you, it downloads less for you, it downloads all of the other little tools, and I think there's only about 5 or 6 that it downloads, and it puts them all into your project file so that you can use them. Now you're actually technically done. So at this point, like, you'll never need to, unless you change computers, you'll never need to like install Node into this project again, or whatever. So you just do that once. So not a huge deal. Now we're kind of getting into what actually makes up the state template. And the state template uses less, and big part of the reason why it uses less is that Bootstrap, it uses Bootstrap, and Bootstrap uses less. There is a SAS version, if for those of you who are maybe a little bit more familiar with it, but the SAS version is actually just a port, maybe not quite as stable. I love SAS, but in this case, less seems to work a little bit better for the template. Now, we're not going to do a deep dive into less. I'm not going to try to teach you everything there is to know about less, but I kind of want to give you guys enough so that you can actually go back and start tinkering with things if you wanted to. And we're only going to focus on those things that are maybe most relevant to theming the state template for your organization's brand. One of the big things people always ask me about less is, how hard is it to get started with less? And if you know CSS, you already know less. If you know anything about JavaScript, you already know less. Less is not a completely new language. In fact, all it is sort of like a bit of a meta language, and it adds a number of features that you can add to your CSS to improve your workflow in it. So one of the big reasons why we chose less is that CSS has its shortcomings. Now, I love CSS, but it doesn't have variables. Now, I know you can wait for the actual CSS variables, but you might be waiting a really long time. Certainly, as of this presentation, it's not even, variables aren't even supported in Edge version 14. So by the time you guys, any CA Gov website can actually use variables, it's going to be way down the road. It's also not very dry. Vanilla CSS is, you end up rewriting a lot of stuff over and over again. It's not very maintainable. Certainly if you're working in a distributed team, it's almost impossible because you have constant conflicts, duplicate code, difficult for distributed teams. So what ends up happening is, or at least what I have seen is, teams will actually use an @import to sort of divide code, but then that adds extra HTTP requests, and that just kind of slows things down. Less will actually allow you to compile all that stuff together. And fortunately, the CA Gov template has all of this stuff already pre-wired. So you can jump right into it and start changing a few things and start seeing some changes. So the only two things that we're going to focus on today are going to be variables and sort of some color manipulation, right? And we're talking about and theming. This is like the 90%, right? But less is really powerful. It gives you nesting and importing. Importing is sort of like your concatenation, if you will. Combines multiple files. If you're familiar with JavaScript, you understand how important or how useful functions are, and obviously that's missing from CSS, and less adds things like that back in there. It allows things. Some of the tooling will allow you to minify your code, improves performance, gives you loops. So if you're familiar with traditional programming loops, we add math, and you can extend certain pieces of code. That stuff is all more advanced. I'm not going to talk about that in today's presentation, but we're just going to focus on variables and color manipulation, which is probably, like I said, that's like the 90% of what you need to do. So here's an example, right? So color P1, and I think that's blue, right? And then it's saying div color, use that color, right? So if you're familiar with traditional programming languages, this is exactly what you're used to seeing. You'll notice that the syntax for the actual CSS is exactly the same as what you're already writing with plain old, vanilla CSS. So CSS or less doesn't change any of that. It just says, hey, let's take that color and let's replace it with a variable that you can now update and change and manipulate, at some other level whenever you need to. Variables themselves, they don't have to be just colors. They can be a number of things. Variables can hold other variables. They can hold image paths, or maybe a size, pixels, or ems. They can actually do color functions, and we're going to talk about that next. If you're interested in knowing more about some of these the features, there's a link down there to the left webpage. So color manipulation. This is one of those things, like, once you start using this, this becomes like indispensable in your workflow. You need to be able to say lighten and darken a color, and I don't know how many times someone has sat in their their cubicle, or they're pounding away, and they're like, oh, the designer didn't specify a hover color, and you have to make some sort of executive decision. So you open up your color picker and you're like, this looks about right, and it's no longer blue, it's purple, but it looks blue on your screen. So, you can do things like lightening and darkening, tint and shade. So tint is sort of like applying a white. Actually, I think it's taking the color and making its transparency as if it were on white. Shade is doing the same thing, but the background would be black, right? So you're tinting it with white, you're shading it with black. And basically what you do is you specify that color. If that color is, a variable, you just put that variable in there and you put the percent. So you say, hey, I want to darken something this color by 10%, and it'll just do the functions for you. You don't have to calculate anything. You don't have to open up Photoshop. It just does it for you. It's like magic almost. So here's a practical example of that, and this is sort of like my use case, right? So here you have an A tag, and it says its color is this color P1. And you want to darken it. So you say darken color by 15%. And it just does that math for you, calculates it out, and it compiles down to your CSS. So let's talk about color schemes and the state template. So this is the Paso Robles and the Sierra. And the state template has, I think, 5 in total. I'm just showing 2 of them here side by side. But how does this happen? And when the state template was created, it was created with a very specific those specific ideas in mind, where you separate that structure from that color scheme, and then it gives you the ability to manipulate the color scheme for your organization. You can have, the state could have independently, a bunch of different, 300 and something different, color schemes, but the structure of everything looks the same. So there's some brand cohesion there. So for example, if we took away the color scheme from the CA Gov template, this is what you're left with. You're left with sort of like a black and white, some default base color, presentation of the state template. So here are the 5 color schemes that are available for the version 4. I think version 5 is still in the works, but these are the 5 color schemes. And what you'll notice is that the designers, when they created these, they actually put a lot of thought into how this is going to be used and how it might translate to other organizations down the road. So they sort of have like this concept of primary and secondary colors. And these primary colors are sort of like your darker, maybe more saturated colors or something. And then your secondaries are the lighter colors. And you'll notice that it's the same, between all of them. They're sort of like, it's similar, right? So if you can imagine your organization and say, hey, if I mapped my my primary and secondary colors to closely match this, I could very easily change the color scheme. So CA Gov, here's these color scheme files, right? So if you open up the source folder for the template, what you'll end up with is this these Oceanside, Orange County, Paso Robles, Santa Barbara, and Sierra. And essentially, these are nothing more than just a big configuration file of a bunch of color variables. And you can see well, maybe I don't, maybe my screenshot here doesn't show it. Further on down, it shows things like lightening and darkening. So there's a lot of things that are just kind of broken out, and they're broken out in hopefully plain English. So you can imagine first level nav links, second level nav links, search accents. Here's your primary and secondary colors. And those map to the primary and secondary colors that we saw on those little swatches, right? So primary, so the color P1, color primary 1, color secondary 1, secondary 2, etc., right? So it becomes pretty straightforward in terms of mapping your colors from your color tile to this theme. So, okay, that's all felt fine and good. How do we get all this stuff to work? So Grunt is this thing that can help automate all of these tools together. And I'm going to say it helps to automate repetitive tasks. And I highlighted the word tasks for a moment because Grunt is this thing called a task runner. And you create tasks that you want the code to run, and it'll execute a bit of JavaScript to do something, right? The CA Gov template has a number of tasks already created. I'm going to get into that just a moment. But basically, it's just JavaScript that's run by Node, right? So you're not writing Node. In this case, you're not even writing JavaScript for the most part. All you have to do is leverage what's already there, and just know that it exists, and maybe understand. Maybe you want to understand how it works. But it helps to improve your workflow by leveraging many free libraries. Last I checked, just Grunt alone had like over 6,000 free code libraries that are available. Node has, I'm drawing a blank, I want to say it was like over 450,000 libraries that are available. So if you want to do something, chances are somebody has already done it before you, right? So that's why we're leveraging all those free technologies, because it improves your workflow and you really don't have to do anything with it. And it helps you to collaborate with your teams because, again, you can break those files up. You can spin up, internal test servers. You can, create continuous build environments if that's what you'd like to do. And it uses things like Grunt to do that. So I mentioned that Grunt is task-based, right? And the state template has three tasks that is shipped in version 4. And they're shifting a little bit between version 4 and version 5. Version 5 isn't 100% ready for prime time yet, at least in terms of the source code. But I think it's coming. But these may change a little bit between those two versions. But basically, there's the default sort of task, and this is best used for your development. It concatenates your JavaScript and your CSS. It watches your file systems for changes, and then it'll automatically reload the web page whenever you make a change, which is really awesome. I mean, I know for myself and working with these kinds of tools, there's nothing more gratifying than having, like my web page up on one side of my screen or on my second monitor, and my code editor on the other side, and I just make a color change, and I can see those changes almost instantly. So then there's another task called dev, which basically just concatenates and minifies. And this is probably what you would want to use if you were putting it on maybe a Jenkins continuous build for, development QA or something like that. If it's minified, it's obviously a little bit more difficult to view the source code and figure out where things maybe are breaking or failing if that's what you're looking for, if that's what you're looking to do. But it doesn't do any of the automatic watching of the file system or any of that. It doesn't do any reloading. It just runs the concatenation and concatenation one time, and that's it. And then there's build. So we're all interested in performance, and minifying your CSS and JavaScript is one of those steps. I know before I got into sort of like this sort of tooling workflow, what I would end up having to do is I would create a bunch of those, CSS files and JavaScript files, and then I would go to some online tools that I would copy and paste the files into, and then it would concatenate them for me and then minify them, and that's just a lot of work. I mean, talking about a slow process for getting a website updated. So this build process, all it does is just concatenates and minifies your CSS and JavaScript for you. There's no third-party, websites or tools that you need to do for that. So here I have a little video. It'll play. So this video, I'll take a pause for a quick moment. So here I wanted to demonstrate that whole live reloading thing by changing a couple of variables. So here I'm opening up the Oceanside theme, and you're going to see that I'm just going to change a couple of the variables up in here, and we'll see these changes reload live. And part of the reason why I want to stop and point this out is that, so my IDE, it gives me the insight into like my Grunt tasks that are available just by the very nature of having that Grunt file in there. Your IDE may or may not, but mine does, and allows me to say click one and run it, so I don't have to do anything else. I don't have to like tell it to run or anything. And then down here you'll see the actual changes that are being applied as it's concatenating these files. So I'll go ahead and continue. Oops. Ah! All right, so here you can see I'm going to select that color. I'm going to change it to red. Sorry, the pointer is really big. It's in the way. But you can see it reloaded over here, and now the top of the header is red. Changed it to coral, and you see it's all being processed down here in the bottom. That's saying it's making these different color schemes. So it's rebuilding the stuff on the fly, and with just a few moments, it refreshes the page and allows me to see exactly what I'm changing. And this is true for pretty much anything, right? So like JavaScript changes, it'll reload the page and whatnot. So I think that's a pretty cool feature. And you can see, well, actually in my next slide. So this is my really ugly theme. I went to Google Material Design, and I said, okay, what are some really ugly colors? And I was like, I'm a designer. I can make something ugly pretty. So I took the material colors, and I created this like garish purple theme. But I did that by changing, I think, only 5 of those variables, right? And then I updated the banner graphic here as well to match. And it took me all of 5 minutes maybe to create this theme. It's a completely different theme just by changing those, say, 5 variables, those color variables that I had mentioned wherever they are here. So I updated 5 of those variables, and I'm done, right? So now you can imagine if you take the same concepts and you apply them to, to those tiles, the color scheme tiles, your brand to those tiles, update these 5 variables. Maybe you have to update a few of these down here depending upon your colors. Maybe you want to change, I don't know, mobile controls. I don't know. You just go in here and change this variable, and it updates, the theme accordingly. So yeah, that's my ugly theme. So any questions at this point? So the question is when I was showing the IDE, what tool was I using? So there's a couple of different things. So I'm using a program called WebStorm, and it's just my IDE of choice. I have used Dreamweaver before. Dreamweaver does currently have some built-in support for less, but they're just looking at using less without any other kinds of tooling. So theirs won't give you, more complicated builds. It won't build your JavaScript and stuff for you or anything. But if you wanted to, if you're not using WebStorm, or if you're not, and I think if I'm not mistaken, you can even do this inside of the Windows IDE, really popular .NET. Somebody help me out. Visual Studio, thank you very much. So I think you can, I believe there's a plugin that you can add that'll basically allow you to run grunt commands, and it's basically works the exact same way. But all of that really could be, if you're okay with opening up the terminal, you can just go to your terminal, change directories into that folder where the project is running from, and saying grunt watch. And it's doing the exact same thing. In fact, if I go back, this is nothing more than just a terminal output, right? That's all it is. It's just a terminal output. This is the same thing that you would see in your terminal. So, are we okay on time? And I saw another question. I just want to make sure that we're respectful. 5 minutes? Okay. We got 5 minutes. I saw another hand a moment ago.
I was wondering if you change those 6 variables, how much testing you have to do for what you changed with accessibility.
For the most part, and let me restate the question for the online audience, is when you change those 6 variables, how much testing needs to be done, regression testing, I'm assuming, for accessibility. If you adhere to sort of like the model that the CA Gov designers created when they created those color palettes, say with dark and the dark and light primary and secondary colors, you should probably only have to do very minimal to none. For the most part, when the fonts were specified, say for example with buttons, we actually used one of those color manipulation variables that says contrast. So it takes the color as an input and it figures out dynamically what color in black or white offers the most contrast given that color. So buttons will automatically flip-flop from, say, a gold and black button to maybe a white button with black text, right? So it'll automatically flip-flop. So hopefully very minimal, but I would always encourage people to just double check that stuff just to make sure it's good to do.